blah, 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 blah.
Welcome to the Our Forever Smiles podcast, a podcast created to support mothers of children who were born with clefts and those who love them. I'm your host, Laura Arroyo, and I'm also a mother of a daughter who was born with a surprise cleft palate. I know the challenges you face every day. Whether you have just learned the difficult news of your baby's cleft lip or palate, you're in the midst of pre-op or post-op, or you're an OG cleft mom, this podcast is for you. In a weekly conversation, we will talk about everything from feeding and speech therapy to surgery and school. We'll share tips from guest experts and advocates and even share a little joy in the process. You can listen to Our Forever Smiles wherever you listen to podcasts. Don't forget to subscribe and stay tuned. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Our Forever Smiles Cleft Mom Diaries and Support podcast. I am Laura Arroyo. Before we jump into this episode, I would like to invite you to join this community to hear conversations with other cleft moms and advocates that will help you feel supported along your journey. All I want you to do is click on the follow or subscribe button. I love your support, and it's incredible to see us all come together. We're just getting started here. And I just can't wait to go on this journey with you. So thank you so much for subscribing. As a note, we are not medical doctors, and we do not intend for you to use the information that we share here as medical advice. We are parents and advocates who love our children, and we are sharing our own personal experiences. I am really excited to speak with our next guest. As many of us here, we go online and just search for groups and communities to feel a little bit of a sense of belonging. And that's exactly what I did when my daughter was diagnosed with her cleft, and I found Scott. Scott Cramton is the founder and CEO of American Immersion Theater, America's most popular immersive events company. Scott owns 6 companies under this umbrella, including Camp Dragon Online, one of the most popular places to play Dungeons and Dragons online, The Princess Party Co., and the Murder Mystery Company, which was just on Shark Tank. Welcome, Scott.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here with us today. So there's so many things that we could talk about. So Scott and I were just sharing so many exciting things that were coming his way. It just not only, of course, everyone likes to talk about the whole Shark Tank thing, but you do have some exciting things that are coming up. What have you been working on recently?
Yeah, so we have a lot of things, obviously, apart from Shark Tank and Blumhouse and all this different stuff. So we're doing a very cool immersive experience for Blumhouse for Speak No Evil, which you'll probably get to see in their promotional materials and hopefully see me actually in there. I'm actually doing that this weekend. And then we're opening up in Times Square, Carmine's. So like right off Times Square, 44th Street, like right across from a 400-foot Harry Potter and 100-person brand new dinner theater thing opening, all murder mysteries. It's going to be amazingly cool. I've been going back and forth from New York and LA and occasionally at home here in New Orleans. It's been amazing. It's been a really crazy 6 months or so, probably the most crazy of my entire life. So I'm very excited.
Yeah, so it's so funny because Scott and I actually recorded an entire episode together that we lost. And so it's just, and then our schedules got so busy with so many things. Of course, I've been working on the podcast and Scott has been working on all these other really cool things. And so I just wanted to allow him the opportunity to share what he's been working on. But of course, we do want to start from the beginning of your journey here.
That's a rehearsal. They're getting such a better episode because this is like the second time. This is the most rehearsed episode of Our Forever Smiles ever. This is the most rehearsed. So we're going to crush this. People at home are going to be like, the best episode ever.
Hopefully. I know, like, so funny. I'm trying not to laugh because Scott is like is hilarious. And we know that, of course, like talking about cleft lip and cleft palate can sometimes be like emotional, and it can be a really heavy topic. And a lot of us get really vulnerable talking about these things. But I'm glad that we have this sense of humor about it, because there's also joy in our journeys as well. And I just remember reading a quote from your website, Scott, and it said Scott was born with a severe cleft palate after years of surgery and vocal training. A fourth grader, Scott was told by a speech therapist that his progress was incredible and he could do anything except be an actor or a public speaker.
I'll remember
Yay.
that for the rest of my life. I'll always remember that exact moment. It's almost like time travel, how well I remember being in that room. It was like a meeting that they were having. I don't know if you remember being a kid where they'd have meetings with your parents and you were there, but nobody ever acknowledged that you were in the room. You were saying, and then they're just like talking about Scott is this and Scott is that. And I'm like, Scott's also a foot and a half from you. Like, just putting it out there, you can just be like he and then point or something like that. But they did that thing, and I remember her laughing. That was the thing that got me the most. She laughed because it was so silly to her. It was such a crazy, far-fetched thing. She had said that she was being, in her opinion, very nice. She was saying, like, how she even said this is like a clubbed foot man running in the Olympics. What has happened here and what we've gotten to. And then she really was like trying to say he could do anything. And then she stopped, and she's not public speaking or something like that. We don't want nothing like that, but anything else. In the same way, he can run, but he's not going to do like track and field as like a joke. It's just not the limitation. And it was that time where I wasn't even very interested in acting. And that is where I got it from. I'm like, I am going to do this. I am going to prove her wrong.
And so I guess in that moment, remember your parents' reaction to that, or?
No, I don't think that they had a big reaction, because I don't think it was like first off, I wasn't talking really to anybody. It wasn't like I said, I was in fourth grade. I didn't pound my fist on the table and say, listen, lady, and then smoke my Camel Joes and walk off in my cool leather jacket. I didn't I just silently thought to myself, because you hate those meetings. And as a cleft palate kid, they happen all the time. They'd have like 20 doctors in to look at you. And then they would have all this train of people, and they'd all talk to your parents, and you'd be like on the table, and they just examined you, but they talk to you in the same way about as often as a checkout clerk talks to the groceries that they're checking out. They're talking to the person with the groceries. I was just groceries. And so I always remember feeling that. But no, they didn't have a huge reaction to that, because they were feeling like that was a huge win. And the idea of me doing that was actually pretty silly. It really was. There is a level where you start being like, this is a thing that is like and I don't want to say disability exactly, but it's a thing you have to overcome. And to some level, if you're born, I don't know, and you only grow to 2 feet tall, it does become a little silly to play in the NBA.
Hello, everyone. Sorry to interrupt, but I need a little bit of help. If you're listening to this on the Apple Podcast app or YouTube, you may see a follow plus sign or a subscribe button. If you're able to, it would mean the world to me if you could follow or subscribe. That's the best way to support this show. If you subscribe, I'm able to show it to potential guests or different brands. It helps to grow the show and reach more communities to continue building awareness about the cleft lip and palate journey on a global scale. Thank you so, so much. Back to the conversation.
But people do it. Those rare people do end up doing it. So I don't think they had this huge reaction, but man, I did. That was one of the biggest moments in my entire life, if not the biggest moment.
Yeah, I find it just so ironic that you've gone on to do way more than the average person in public speaking. So for someone to share that or to say that to me,
it's terrible. I can't shut up. I just keep talking. It's terrible now. So don't worry. If you're at home wondering if your kid could grow up like me, and you could be like, oh gosh, I wanted them to talk and do everything normal, and now they won't stop talking.
Yeah, what's so funny is I was so worried. That was like one of the things that I was like really concerned about among all of the other things. It was like speech. And I think that sometimes the worry comes from, I think people equate like speech to level of education. It's a bias that people have. And so
100%.
like even if you have an accent, people tend to just have these biases. And so I really wanted to, that was something that was really important to me to stay on top of, was Giselle's speech. And I was so worried about that. And now literally she talks all day, sings and she talks. And I'm just like, okay, you're right. It's like enough.
Yeah. Well, but that's fantastic. That's amazing. How old is she now?
She's 2.
Two. Okay. All right. All right.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
So
that's
we're good.
great.
Yeah. And it's, yeah, you laugh. We're just getting started here. She hasn't even said all that she wants to say. But yeah, you mentioned like all of the appointments that you had to go to. And
Yeah.
do you remember the first surgery that you had, or the first appointment that you had?
Everything is, if you're listening at home right now, I can tell you that if you have a newer kid with a cleft palate, or they're not 40 like I am, I can tell you this: everything is so much better than what I went through. They were really light years behind where they are now. The stuff they do in 3 surgeries for me, they're doing in 1 surgery for your kids. So that's a huge win. But no, I can't remember my first surgery because they had me in surgery at old. Like I remember, I think it was like 4 surgeries or 5 surgeries. 4 surgeries before I was 2. So they had me in a lot of different stuff. And the ones I really remember is when they widened out my nasal passages, which is probably the most life-changing one for me because I used to talk a lot more like this, and it was really hard. And I still don't really breathe through my nose too much, but I can in the way that you can, like when you have a cold. That's like my good, but it's still, I can. So I remember that one. And I do remember thinking, like, I remember crying and being like, I don't think this is fair, Mom. But I was like 2nd or 3rd grade, and it was like I was missing school again for a surgery, and it felt like a lot to put on a kid. And I had one to strengthen my eyes, because my eyes were like, I was a wreck in elementary school. I'm always thankful that and this is like elementary school in the 80s, where if they're like, if you see a kid like hanging, like they're like pantsing a kid or something like that, or like beating them up, the lunch moms are, hey guys, you should probably stop that, in a while. Like, no, 5 more minutes of beating up that kid and then we're done. Okay. That used to be what it was like. Nowadays, they're much more protected, and it's very different. I talked to Urkel during the height of Urkel. I'd get out of bullying by being like, they're like, say it. And I'm like, can I do that? I'd get out of that by doing stuff like that. So things are very different, and they are much easier. It's not to say that they're not hard. They are, but they're much, much easier than when I was growing up. And I grew up much easier than people in the 60s, because you had in the 60s, they're just like, hope you live.
Yeah. Do you think, so I actually just came back from Cleft, and it's Smile Train's annual event, and it's
I'm part of Smile Train now. I couldn't make it because I was in New York, but I'll be at the next one. So hopefully doing it for
They're supposed to have it in Orlando.
Yeah.
So that should be really fun. I plan on going to the next one as well. And it's growing. I was able to meet so many wonderful people, of course, people that have already been on the podcast and stuff. And so I was able to hear like a lot of different stories and from cleft affected people. And I think that one thing, so many of these instances stick with you, but someone that I met named Ellie, she was talking about how the first surgery that she remembers, or that the first visit that she remembered that was like traumatic to her, she said she vividly remembers like the mask going on her and reaching for her mom, but she was obviously overcome by the anesthesia. And so after that, she always had this, rightfully so, negative feelings about just going under and that sort of thing.
I'll admit to that. I really hate the idea of going under. I don't have a lot of the stuff you had mentioned it last time of like, do you have, like, you had a cool word for it that I don't know, like past trauma response or something like that, for something cool like that. But I will say I do hate going under, because there's just a lot of negatives. One of the things, I'm not a fan of America's healthcare system. I'm just full candor. If you're a big fan of America's healthcare system and you would like to write me hate letters because of my views, feel free. But I will tell you guys this: anesthesiologists in almost any other country in the world, 3 is like the limit of people they can like oversee. And in America, they can do 12 at the same time. And that is bonkers, because in Europe, they don't find it safe to really do 2. And then they're like, in America, like 8, 12, whatever. So I am very cautious if I get surgeries or my family gets surgeries or loved one gets surgeries. I'm always like talking to the anesthesiologist because that's oftentimes the biggest problem with the surgery. And that's the person I care more about the anesthesiologist than I do about the surgeon because the surgeons can usually nail it. They do one thing and they do it over and over again. But like the anesthesiologist, what if they get pulled away? What if one of the 8 people that they're looking at literally has a problem? What are they doing? They're not watching the other things. So that's the thing that I think scary. But
Yeah, I think that was one of the things that I was really worried about with Giselle's repair because, of course, I read something that was like wild, but it was, I think somebody, one of the anesthesiologists, they recorded her weight, the patient's weight wrong. And so and it was a baby, and they gave her,
oh my God,
like
half a
triple
quarter.
the amount. Yeah, like it was like wild. And I can't remember. And actually, I'm glad I can't remember if the baby survived or not, but I read that, of course, right before palate repair. So I'm like, it's
Oh
so,
my,
yeah.
I will say this. I do feel terrible for moms right now because first off, I can't even tell you not to worry because that's just impossible. Like you're a mom. There's no way you're not like, what am I going to say? Hey, I don't have some magic words that are going to make you not worry. Hey, if Jesus came down and said, don't worry, it's going to be okay. You're still in the back of your head going to be like, but what if Jesus is wrong? Like, you don't know, like nothing's going to stop you from worrying. So I get that, but a lot better than it used to be. And you just do your research, especially with like where they're going in and as particularly an anesthesiologist, like really saying, well, how many people are they overseeing? How many people at the same time? That kind of stuff. That's what I focus on for any of those things. And that's what I recommend. I think a lot of people are doing amazing cleft palate surgeries now. So that's at least a win.
Yeah. I think that's a great question because I don't even, so now the way that it works is we have cleft teams, right? So we actually, I don't know if it was the same for you growing up, but our annual cleft team appointment, they put you in a room and then the doctors rotate and come see you. So you don't have to go to all these different places to see people. So you'll see the ENT. They even have a therapist now that comes in as well to talk to, of course, like school age children. And ironically, the anesthesiologist is not included in that team. And it's never, I don't even know their name. And I guess that's probably the same for any type of procedure that anyone is going to have. But
that's not
it's
true.
really,
A lot of times you do meet the anesthesiologist that you're supposed to, or even sometimes in your pre-consult, because they're a big part of that.
yeah.
Like surgeries go wrong most of the time because of that. Sorry, I'm freaking people out because I get freaked out about it. And I've had some negative stories in my life because of it. So yeah, I'm hyper paranoid about that. But no, there was no team. My whole cleft palate situation was really weird. And I'm always cautious to even bring it up because it sounds made up. It sounds like a fantasy story of what happened to me. Do you want to hear it? And promise that you won't be like, this jerk is making this up.
No, I've heard so many.
Okay, so this is weird though. They weren't going to cover my cleft palate surgery. So my dad was like treasurer of the union and he had to like threaten a strike and people got behind that. So then basically the company pressured the insurance company and the insurance company's okay, fine, we'll cover it because a lot of them were like based on cosmetic, which is still kind of a problem in America, which is absolutely bonkers to think that he can't eat, but that's cosmetic. That's fine. He's not good at breathing right now, but I think that's pretty much just like that's the same as like an ear lift or something like that. Like it was so bonkers. But anyway, so he got us to there and then that became like a thing and he got a tiny bit of attention. And there was a guy, there was a very good surgeon that was nicknamed the man with the golden fingers, which sounds super dirty, but is not. He was just basically this really talented surgeon, and he would do different surgeries on the agreement that basically people would, like patients of him would end up getting looked at and periodic checks and stuff. My parents like gleefully signed up for that. And he did like 6 or 7 cleft palate surgeries, and mine was really good, like amazingly good. I know this because I went for 18 years solid in rooms where people would like, hey, Jessica, come check this out. This is really good. Wow. And then I'd have my mouth open and they'd be like, no, yeah, look at that. Holy. But he ended up dying in a plane crash, which I'm one of those like private plane kind of crashes because he also was very rich. And there was only like 6 examples of him doing cleft palate. So I would often get seen by like teams of people that were not related to my team, but they were just studying me. And at the time, I didn't really understand it, but I also didn't understand that doctors didn't work in large groups for a very long time. A doctor, I saw 5 doctors, and I'm like, this is how doctors work. 5 at a time, sometimes 12. But yeah, they'd be packed in the room. They'd all take turns, like with a little light and looking at and then they'd be like doing things. And sometimes it was like they'd have like 4 or 5 interns there or something. But so I got to be very lucky with that. How he did it, I guess. I don't understand. I have a feeling that nowadays it looks very unimpressive because I don't know if people at the top of their mouth can feel it, but I can feel where it goes together. And I don't think that's the case with a lot of people now. Yeah, I have like sharp point and my top of the roof of my mouth. But at the time, they were like, wow, miracle. So I was very lucky. I was lucky my dad was able to pressure a union and they were able to cover it because, again, they were going to give me 0 surgeries. 0 was the recommended amount. I ended up needing 6 cleft palate surgeries, and the amount that HAP was going to pay for it was 0.
Wow.
Yeah.
Why 6? Was that standard during the time, or did they fail, or was it like
there was never a failure. There's different things. I don't know all of them, and people listening right now have more knowledge because this is pre-internet, okay? The only way to know about another cleft palate is if you ran into a dude. I'd never seen another cleft palate person until I was like 15. Run into another person that had it, never really saw a person or anything like that. They just did surgeries in steps. I also know part of it was I was very young. I know that they had to do fast surgery to be able to get me to a point where I could, and that kind of stuff. I know that there was the third one was the one with the man in the golden fingers, I believe. And then I had another one in between that. I know I had a nasal widening one. I had another one that was based somewhat on my nose and kind of more internal and trying to get that pathway to work. But yeah, it was a severe cleft palate. It didn't just come with normal cleft palate stuff. A lot of my things were split and things like that.
Yeah, it's so funny. I've learned and known all this terminology and stuff just like doing this and just
and because you have the internet, like you can do a whole degree on this. You're more trained, likely more right now than my surgeon did. So that's the honest truth. You probably know more about this than they did. They probably knew like the one thing to do and then they were done. And you have hundreds of terminologies. There was no psychologist or psychiatrist when I was there. Or there was like the whole psychiatry thing was a nurse saying, you're going to get to eat ice cream for like almost a week. And that was the psychologist. That was the whole positive run. They're like, and that was honestly pretty good for me. I don't know if I needed anything more. Ice cream for a week?
So funny. Yeah, no, there's an actress in Canada. Her name is Alicia Pelche, and she recorded an episode with me as well. You should probably connect with her. She's a wonderful person. But cool. It was so funny during our episode. She was saying, I feel like such a bad cleft palate person. I don't know.
No, it isn't. I mean, it depends on how old you are, right? The honest truth is, I don't know if more than 2 people in my life have asked me why I had that many surgeries. I do know that was more standard back then.
Yeah.
And I do know that one of them was just like, oh God, we need to get anything happening right now because it was a big deal when I was born. They weren't like, I'll walk it off for a while. And I know there was a lot of turmoil and they didn't know if they could bring me home and all this different stuff. And I didn't eat very well. Apparently I didn't know to cry, which was a weird one that I've been told 100 times. They're like, you never cried. I'm like, what do you mean I never cried? You're like, you never cried as a child. I'm like, I never cried. And they're like, yeah, they took you to the doctor. And they're like, he's never asked for food or made any real sounds. And that was what my parents told me. And both my mom and dad said that. I do honestly believe that because they've stuck to that the whole time. They're like, yeah, it took you like 6, 7 months before you made any real sounds for food or anything like that. And I dropped weight after I was born because they're like, when do you feed them? When do you ask for it? I never asked for food, so they didn't know when to feed me. So
Mm. Yeah, it's interesting. I'm reading this book called Choosing Ourselves, and it's actually a book between a mom and son. The son was born with a severe cleft lip and palate, and they talk about each other's journey. And so you've shared the things that you've discussed, obviously, with your parents about your experience. Was there anything else that they have shared about what they went through in that experience, just being parents during that
they
time?
were amazing parents, and I am like it always depends on how you look at things. I've always looked at myself as very lucky, and I think I was. I think I'm one of the luckiest. I'm insanely lucky. I've always been very blessed, lucky, karma, whatever you want to say. Whatever happened, I was better in a different life, something like that. I feel like I've been very lucky. My parents were great. They drove me everywhere constantly for this stuff. It was a full-time job for my mom. She was taking me to speech therapy literally 5 days a week. They were working at home with me for speech therapy, which I didn't want to do, and they just kept pushing until I really did it. Yeah, I think it was very stressful for them. I imagine it's obviously not what they want. As I get older, you hear that thing like you just hope your kids are healthy, and I think you can be very healthy with a cleft palate, but it's just very much a lot of work. I know that was frustrating. I know that my dad almost lost his job over it,
Mm.
obviously, because
Mhm.
he had to try to force a strike too because of his son. That's a weird position to be in. I know that they hated the healthcare system the whole time, which is fair because it was awful. But I really do feel like in the last 45 years, it has gotten somewhat worse. So I'm sorry for the surgeries, the technology, that's all way better, guys. But the system of healthcare, because you used to be able to actually call somebody and be like, no, they really do need this. And the health insurance company would be like, make a decision on the phone. They'd be like,
Mhm.
okay. And you could just like talk to a guy. And there's nobody, like, it's impossible. They're all just a series of people that are impossible to talk to. Train. That's one reason I really signed up with them. But to answer your question, man, I they never complained, and they were amazing parents, and amazing your parents for being like watching this kid who they worked their butt off to be able to do something. I could have done something safe. I was really good in math. They felt like I had strong careers in very easy to get things that I could obtain. And then I still went to school for theater, and they're like, go get him, Tiger. And now I think about that and I'm like, that's insane. That wasn't a good choice. That was an insane choice. What a crazy one in a million thing to to risk on that. I know that it took a lot of their money and a lot of their resources, which was challenging, which I was fortunate enough to be able to give back to some degree because I have been very lucky. But yeah, it's a challenge. I do think that every parent think about it a lot differently now, though. I really do. I think parents think about it and worry about it in very unique and different ways. Just weren't worried about back then.
I guess in what way would you? So when I think of your dad, if I had to go through that, I think I would have more rage than sadness. I can like even you just listening to you talk about this, like if I had to go fight my job, like to have now I'm pissed off. Like
Yeah.
I'm
I mean,
already set, right? But now I'm pissed.
yeah, absolutely. And it wasn't exact. I want to be clear. It was a weird thing to do because they worked hard and but they couldn't get insurance to cover it. So they just needed the job to fight them and say, look, we're taking our whole people off this plan if you don't. So it wasn't like his job, to be fair to them, was ever like, no, the child gets nothing and thumbs
Mhm.
down like Caesar. But they didn't want to threaten to pull off a good deal in insurance. If all the workers agreed, they did. I think the ways that it's so different is I think there's a tremendous amount of concern about the mental state of the kids having a cleft palate. I think there's a tremendous amount of concern about, like, is my child going to be truly different, truly ostracized, truly. I think that there's such a heavy weight with it for parents right now I think that's put on everybody from the internet, from reading all this stuff, from having almost a burden of a lot of knowledge. And I can tell you this, I'm 40 now. I don't think about my cleft palate every day. I'll go weeks without thinking about my cleft palate. I have some limitations, but we all have some limitations. And I promise you, your kid is not going to, kids are resilient. Just teach the kid to focus on what they want, not wanting them to be normal or wanting them to be okay, but treat them with a normal kid because they want to be that. A lot of times the reason they feel like they're not normal is their parents don't treat them like they're normal. And that's part of the thing because they're so scared. They're reading stuff on the internet all the time. And it's a big deal, but there's bigger deals, if that makes sense. So
Yeah.
there's bigger things, and anybody can overcome this. Like anybody can. There is nobody in nowadays society that they can't do whatever they want to do. It's just a little bit more work than you'd prefer.
Yeah.
Not the easiest road, but there's a lot of things that they could have been born with that have much harder roads. And
Yeah.
I thank God every day that I don't have any of those. A cleft palate is nothing compared to other people I've met. And it's going to be okay. That's really what it's going to be. It's going to be okay. Just treat them like they're kids. They want to play. They want to have fun. They don't want to think if they're going to have surgery trauma, or kids are going to make fun of them if they're perfect. If they come out and they look like the most gorgeous, perfect baby in the world and they go to middle school, kids are going to make fun of them. Doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what's going to happen. You go to middle school, if you and me right now go to middle school, they're going to make fun of us. Kids are brutal in middle school. Really, if you have a big problem, just pull them out of 7th and 8th grade, because that's the brutal time. And then put them back in 9th grade where things are cool again.
Oh, that's so funny. It's true that it's so true. I think one of the things too that I've heard from parents, like the realization is that when they're young, you have so much worry, and so it consumes your world.
It
And you
does.
don't realize that it's not really consuming their world. It is you are just, are you okay? Are you okay, Cindy? Is everything okay?
They're fine. They are fine.
And they're trying to be like, Mom, leave me alone about am I okay? Then they start asking themselves, am I okay? Or like you project these feelings. Yeah.
Yeah. I think one other quick advice is that my parents did that I don't know if I'd be even strong enough to do myself is they did not allow me to not put in the work. It didn't matter if I felt like it. It didn't matter what my feelings were. My feelings are not a factor in the work. I did the work in the same way that you wouldn't let your kid get up and be like, school today, pass. They'd go to school, right? Like they couldn't just pass because they don't feel like it. And that's how they treated it. They treated it like it was the part of what my life was. And if I told them I didn't think that was fair, stuff like that, they'd be like, it's not exactly fair, but this is your life. It's not a comparison to everybody else's, but that work ethic helped me now. And now I get to have fun, do fun and cool things.
Yeah. Just in speaking of that, what were your biggest speech challenges that you had to overcome?
Girl, I still have them, but I have so many. I learned to say a bunch of stuff wrong because I think I learned that has a Z in it technically by pronunciation around age 16, maybe 17. I said is the whole time. So I still have to really focus to do 3 or 4 different things. And if I get tired, I'll slur my words more and such. I obviously have somewhat of a lisp. Back then, it was a lot about nasalness, and that was really hard because I'd run out of breath while talking. You need to push so much air out of my diaphragm to try to make it so I wouldn't talk exactly like this, like what you do when you hold your nose. That's just how I sounded. So they were trying to do anything they possibly could to make that work, but it didn't until I had that surgery. And then they taught me a bunch of different things. I know I technically say certain things like differently than you would say them, using different like tongue interactions or whatever. And I'm not going to change that at this point in time. I'm bought in. But my S sound, Z sound was very big. Nasalness. Nasalness was the hard one because that was the target. It was just really obvious. And of course, it was Urkel times, which Family Matters, my true nemesis. Someday I'm going to, like, Jekyll White's a great guy, I'm sure, but someday I'm going to accidentally run into him and just out of instinct punch him in the face. Be like, you ruined my childhood. Couldn't you have been nerdy in a different way? Not so nasal.
Yeah, it sounded different, right?
Yeah, I was the exact same age as Urkel during the exact same time. The comparison was just there. It was so hot. He had 3 or 4 catchphrases. And I'd have to, yeah, those are some of the struggles. They went a lot more way around 15, though, and that helped a lot. I felt like we started catching stride and figuring it out a little bit more. So,
yeah, I was gonna ask you. Of course, we were joking about the Urkel stuff, and did you lean into it? Like, how did you build this confidence that you have now?
This is the 80s, and it's not the 60s or 70s, which were worse. But the 80s were still pretty bad, and you do what you're doing to survive. So sometimes, yeah, I'd be around the playground being like, did I do that? Who cut the cheese? That kind of stuff. And I do that, or I'd try to just not talk as much, or I'd try to, but you can lean into stuff in high school, and people get it, and there's some kind of decorum when kids are between like 4th grade and like 8th grade, there is no leaning into stuff. If you're like a kid that's like a little too tall, a little too short, a little too anything, there's no leaning into it. They're coming after you. And then you hope they rotate to somebody else. I don't have a great experience with that, but also note that times are very different. Like bullying wasn't even like a thing. That bullying was like, the bullying advice was, if a bully bullies you back, punch him. That was the advice. My dad would never even be like, go narc on him. Should I tell somebody? And my dad, no, you don't tell somebody. What's wrong with you? Oh, my son's not telling anybody. Punch him in the face. And then I remember doing that once. I remember like they lean in. I'm like, I'm going to do what my dad says. I push the kid on the ground. And then I'm in the principal's office. They're like, you're violent. And I'm like, what? I thought this was what we were supposed to do. I was following the assignment. But
that is so funny. People can hear me. I'm like shaking the table. I'm laughing so hard. But I get
it's so different now. I mean, it really is. They stop things like that. Bullying's still real and stuff like that. I'm not saying it's not, but people are aware of it now. You can call a parent and be like, hey, your child's bullying mine.
Yeah, I think the impact is different too, though. Like kids are, I don't want to use this word, but they're so sensitive. And I think there's different coping mechanisms that I feel like I had growing up as well. You're right. It's punch him in the face or get over it. It's not the solution.
Yeah. No, and it was hard at times. It was really hard. I don't want to downplay that. Remember that kids are still reflections of their surroundings. They're around their parents the most. If you feel your kid's too sensitive, maybe you're treating them too sensitively. You can't always do that. That's not always the case. With kids, sometimes they'll do the reverse of you. You're not going to be able to totally shield them and protect them. And if you magically somehow perfectly could, you've probably made a horrifying mistake. You know how, like in the movies, they have those genie wishes, but they're all bad. Not like the fun Disney kid Aladdin one, but like Wishmaster or something like that, where you're like, you do a monkey paw wish and you're like, I'd like $1 million. And then it somehow like, you get it from a bank robbery and the police arrest you, something like that. I think that if honestly you had like a monkey paw wish and you're like, I want to protect my kid the whole way and I want to make sure they're shielded and safe and comfortable, I bet you would get that wish and be like, that was the greatest mistake of my life. Yeah, because that is an unrealistic setting and it's an unrealistic goal and it's an unrealistic everything. Having a cleft palate is hard work. Be honest. My parents never told me that it wasn't. Not for a second. They never said, oh, it's going to be okay. It wasn't going to be okay. It was going to be hard work. So they treated it like that. And they're like, if you want to accomplish these things, You have to do these things. If you
Yeah.
want to start that, you have to do that stuff. And it's going to be hard work, and it's not always going to be easy.
Yeah.
I wasn't protected. I wasn't safe. I sure as hell wasn't comfortable. But I was lucky. I ended up meeting some great kids, some good friends, some people that protected me. I got a better sense of humor from all of this. I definitely don't think things are as big a deal. Like I can do meetings with people, meetings and things like that. And I don't freak out as much because I went through all this. And I think your kids can do that too. And probably better than me. They might even
Yeah.
have a full head of hair or something. Dare to dream. And started going bald at 19. So that was probably more traumatic than half the cleft palate stuff. They have a chance to be significantly better than where I am, and I'm not doing that bad.
Yeah. Clearly, you're right. Like you're doing great and you've built up this confidence and this ability to show up in a room and kill it. I want to talk a little bit about Shark Tank, just
Yeah, for sure.
with Shark Tank. But yeah, so Scott appeared on Shark Tank, right? What is the episode? Just in case people wanted to check it
I
out.
believe it's the most recent season, episode 18. So I think that season 15, episode 18, I believe. It's the one with Jason Blum.
Gotcha. So what was that? First of all, how do you get on Shark Tank?
So I am very lucky. I run a weird company, and they found me from the murder mystery company. And I think they were looking for something that would fit their Halloween episode. I got that sense when they told me we're looking for something that fits our Halloween episode. And for the most part, you audition for Shark Tank. We were lucky. They just contacted us. And I went, I think what served me is like that hard work thing. And I had already had a pitch that I had been interested in. And I talked to them. I wasn't super starstruck about it. I talked to the first person, then I said, hey, look, hey, I have you. Do you want to know my pitch? It's really unique. And then they're like, okay. And that pitch I said was very close to what happened on the show. And I had heard, I'm not sure if I'm officially supposed to say this, but whatever, they can sue me later. Basically, we didn't make the Halloween episode. So they were going to cut us. So after we went through the whole thing, they were going to cut us. And because I said that pitch, the person who heard that and heard what I was going to do went to the executive producer and said, don't cut this one. This is their pitch. Listen to the pitch first. So she did the pitch for him, and he's okay, we'll cut something different. I like that. So it was that above and beyond thing that ended up doing it. And that's how we did a lot of stuff they've never done on Shark Tank. Like the lights went off, which was really hard to get them to agree to do. They kept doing these half measures, but I will say my producing team was amazing. They had crazier, zanier ideas than even I did. I'm like, can we actually do that? Like putting somebody I wanted somebody in the suit, of armor as a surprise. But we ran out of people, so they volunteered one of their people, like one of their interns or something like that, to be in the suit. They were so excited to set that up, and they had to hide it from the sharks, even though they're on set the whole time, which involved them putting up curtains and stuff like that just to get that real surprise. But yeah, it was really cool to be on. A lot of neat things about it. The hardest part about being on it is I was on it in September, and I had to keep a secret until March.
Oh my goodness.
Oh, tough. And that whole time, you don't know if you're going to make it on. I think it's of the things that are shot, only 60 or 65%, I believe, make it on. Don't quote me on that. But so you still don't necessarily make it on. And I was with people that were really cool, had awesome businesses, that we were talking backstage and stuff. They didn't make it. And I feel like, I'm like, oh God, and they had to wait 8 months, and they don't find out they don't make it for 8 months.
Oh, you don't find out until you watch it with everyone else?
You find out 3 weeks beforehand.
Oh,
3 weeks before air is when they'll tell you if you made it or not. So it's hard. All right. But the set, super cool. Got to see the Halloween set. They filmed 2 at the same time, which is neat. Really long days. I haven't shared a lot of this stuff because it was too close, but now I think it's fine more. We were, I think, the 13th thing they were going to shoot that day. And I remember talking, I'm like, 13th? out of how many? And the producer's 13. And I'm like, so wait, but what happens if we don't get it? They're like, we'll try to put it in tomorrow. And I know what that means. We're not doing it.
Oh,
And
wow.
we're here. We've done everything. And I'm like, we're not going to film. And apparently we were told confidentially that the Sharks could use a little pick-me-up, something different. So then they just suddenly, they were like, hey, all right, you guys probably have about 6 hours until we're filming. And then they came back and they're like, hey, you guys have about 60 seconds until you're filming. Because they're like, the Sharks need to pick me up. And I'm like, yes. So we ended up going near the front of the episode, and that's where we aired too. And yeah, it went better than I expected. You're there a lot longer. I was talking for like probably 30 minutes. A lot of cool stuff happened that didn't make air. There's a lot of probably uncool stuff that was boring that happened that did not make air too. So they do a good job, but yeah, fun, neat to be on the lot and everything like that. And you just don't know what's going to happen. And it's almost a year now, and I still don't know what's going to happen. The Times Square thing just popped up. The Speak No Evil thing just popped up. It's amazing.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful. When they made that change, you're going to be on.
Yeah, like, yes, I don't get nervous very often because I've done so many shows. I've done like over 1,000 of our own shows, and I was absolutely nervous. And I went into like full, like super Seon clown mode. I was talking to everybody. I was making the cameramen laugh. I was distracting them from doing the actual show. The director had to tell me, okay, why don't you stay more in your corner? Because I had to hide in a corner off stage to come in the dark as a detective. I didn't get to walk down the cool Shark Tank aisle. Also, one more fun fact, if you do watch the episode, I told nobody, not even my own producing team, that I was planning to fake die at the end. Because I was positive they were not going to approve it. And my producing team was awesome. And I was so positive they weren't going to approve it. I'm like, if I get a deal, I'm fake dying, and that is what I'm doing. And I did that in the episode, and they're like, okay, we're going to want to film that twice, please.
Oh, wow. Oh, so they recorded it again?
Yeah, they did. They had to record it again. They're like, they're not going to let us. And then sure enough, I saw the episode, and there I am dying. Because I'm like, it played. Yes, it played well. But,
Oh, wow.
the advice of any of this stuff is you just go for it as hard as you possibly can. Like, you just absolutely shoot for the moon. The things I ask for, there's like 30 of them. They're like, we've never done that. That is not how we do the show. Blah, blah, blah. At one point in time, I tried to hide under Mr. Wonderful's chair, and that's where it's going to pop up from. And I had a whole system for that. They're like, that one's not going to fly, Scott. But yeah, we did tons of stuff. They've never had somebody fake come out of the entranceway. And then obviously nobody's ever died on Shark Tank for real.
Wow. No, that's incredible. I just imagine myself probably would have fainted for real. That's opportunity of a lifetime. And I'm excited. I feel just in what you've shared, right? It's a lot of hard work, a little bit of luck, and just all these things that just come together so well. And if you had to give one piece of advice, you've given so much advice here to the moms out there that are like worrying or that are concerned, that are thinking about their child's future, what would you say would be your best piece of advice?
Honestly, assuming that you don't need advice on like the actual concept of the surgeries or anesthesiologists or something like that, if you're talking about raising a child, remember, you're not raising a cleft palate child, you're raising a child. Kid, this is your flesh and blood. And if God forbid they were born without a thumb, wouldn't spend your whole life focusing on that one aspect. So it's going to come from you about making them a cleft palate kid or a kid. And I have been a cleft palate kid my whole life. And there's no shame in being a cleft palate kid. But I can tell you that I wanted to be a kid. And I was always thankful for the many people in my life that after a while, they just treated me like a kid. They treated me like Scott, not a condition, not a thing to overcome. It was just a thing that you're going through, and everybody has it. Every kid out there has something, except for 2, and we can all be jealous of those 2 kids. But the rest all have stuff. But again, those 2 kids are really lucky. but the rest of us have to work hard. All right. It's okay. One's in Australia, one's in Sweden. So you probably don't even have to deal with them in America.
I just want to thank you so much, Scott, of course, for being on today and for doing this again
Yeah.
with me. And thank you all for listening to the Our Forever Smiles Cleft Mom Diaries and Support podcast. Be sure to subscribe and submit a review of the podcast wherever you listen. I hope that you've enjoyed this audio experience. Maybe you cried a little, laughed a little, but more importantly, I hope that you feel a little piece of reassurance and even joy in your journey. Talk to you next week.